everybody, and welcome to JARG, the podcast that brings you information on endometriosis and adenomyosis. My name is Kathleen King, and I'm joined tonight by a really good friend of mine, an advocate that I really look up to, and one of the most powerful and strongest women that I think I've met in recent years, and that is Aimee Brown. She's no stranger to a lot of you. She's a pro at podcasting at this stage and giving interviews. And, you know, I'm only can come in second, I think, to Miriam O'Callaghan on this one. But Aimee, would you like to give us a wee intro and let us know a wee bit about yourself?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be part of this, what you're doing. I think it's just invaluable, and it's such a great tool for many struggling kind of patients out there who don't know the information they need. So yeah, I'm delighted to be part of it. So yeah, Aimee Brown, I am 31. I have my diagnosis 10 years now, but only really found out what endometriosis was 5 years ago when I met Kathleen. And so the advocacy was kind of born from there when I realized I wasn't the only one that was feeling this way. And truthfully, I was so overwhelmed the first day I went to an event that you held, and there was physical people that I could touch who had the same experience as me, and this just blew my mind and changed the course of my life. I ended up doing a social studies course after my first endometriosis excision surgery in Bucharest. And I'll never forget sitting in the class one day when the guidance counsellor was talking about the CAO applications next year. And I had written off the idea in my head that I could go to third level education. And I'll never forget him asking me directly why. And I couldn't answer him. I had this vision in my head that endometriosis and chronic pain was going to hold me back. But I had done it with the level 5, so why couldn't I do it with the level 8? And that was where I decided to go to apply for the level 8 bachelor's degree in social care work. And it was born from my advocacy. And I'm 3 years in now, and everybody keeps asking me, what's the plan? What am I going to do when I get my degree? And I keep saying, I'm going to be an advocate. I don't know who for or in what area, but I am going to be an advocate. And that's because of you. So
thank you. And I remember the first day that we met, and if you don't mind me saying, you were broken. You're an absolutely broken woman. You could barely walk. You were that shell shocked. You found it even hard to speak at times. And I'll never forget that day, because it was one of the things where my heart actually broke. I felt like I couldn't do anything for you. And, you know, like so many women in the room that day, it was like, I knew I was asking a lot of you to be in the room and to sit in the room and to try and, you know, take training and undergo training to sort of help others in this situation. But to take what you've done, and you've taken not just the role, but you've ran with it, you've redefined the role, you've created a very safe and open and visceral sort of advocacy role as well too. And I think people really like that. They like your honest approach, and they like your direct approach as well too. But I think for me, looking on, it's your strength that really, really strikes me. And you mentioned there about going back to college. So that itself is a huge step. It's a huge step with a chronic condition. There's no doubt about it. It's a huge step going back at a later age as well. Is there anything that was, that helped sort of around that time when you were going back to college? Did anybody come in and say, look, Aimee, here's the grant, here's the way around this, or is it just that there is no support there and it is difficult to navigate the system?
Well, I wouldn't say anybody kind of came in and said, oh, look, here this is. It was kind of up to me to figure out what was out there and what was available. And a friend of mine who was doing a similar course in UCD in Dublin had told me about the 1916 bursary, which was a grant that I could apply for. And there was strict criteria. You kind of had to be broke and, in receipt of the Susie grant and able to prove that you were of low socioeconomic status and this kind of stuff. So I done the application, and then there was a rigorous round of interviews and stuff. So I had to go through that as well. So like my mom would often say, you're very lucky. And I'd say, I know I'm lucky, but I also worked hard for it. It didn't just land in my lap, so that was a huge help. I was awarded the bursary, the top tier. So that's been a huge help in terms of even being able to buy products for endometriosis. Like, we all know how expensive it is trying to buy vitamins and like God knows what, the list is never ending of the things we buy to try and help get through the day. So that's been a huge help. And I linked in with the disability service it was LIT when I started first, but they've now got university status. So it's TUS, the Technological University of Shannon. So I linked in with disability services and I had a meeting with them and basically explained to them the ins and outs. Again, I didn't hold back. I was very honest. I was very direct. I wasn't trying to sugarcoat what was going on with me. I just told them out straight because I do find honesty is the best policy, and then you can't get caught up if you let something slip. Or, it's best to be just out straight from the get go. And I'm glad I was, because it ended up I got what's called an academic inclusion notice. So it's basically a letter highlighting the extra supports that I needed in order to be the most comfortable to get through college. So every semester they check in with me and see, has this changed? Are there any more supports you need, like additional things that we can add in, which is really great. And then I send that academic inclusion notice to all my lecturers. So they're aware that I'm in chronic pain, that I need a different kind of chair to what the rest of the students might be sitting on. And to any notes that we're going to go through in lectures, they have up available on the OneDrive or the Moodle page the night before. So like that, my concentration can dip, especially on high pain days. So it's handy that I have the notes prior, that I can go at my own pace and I can take notes kind of throughout the class that way. So yeah, that's pretty much the extent of the support.
Like that's great that there is actually some supports out there. But and you've mentioned a very important point there. It was somebody that had put you onto this, and somebody who'd actually pointed out that information. And many people don't know that there's any support out there at all. And I see, people going through, junior cert, leaving cert, going in through college and not knowing, to maybe approach disability services. Because again, while endometriosis is not classified as a disability, neither is adenomyosis, but their effects can be so far reaching and very, very debilitating. So I always say to people to focus on the effect that it has on your life rather than the labels that we place on it. So if your chronic pain means that you can't do this, this, and this, that's the sort of approach to it. But it must take a huge amount of determination and effort to juggle everything that's going on. So apart from being driven by the absolute passion that you have, and I know it's there because I know you're going to come through this, you're going to advocate not just for yourself and the endometriosis community, you're going to have a niche in the future as well, where you're going to advocate for many other groups. So is that drive enough, or what, are you fueled by rage, or what is it? What's the secret?
Honestly, it's probably a bit of everything. Like, rage is definitely there. And the more I learn in the social care world, the more rage I feel. Like, honestly, I feel like policies are the number one detriment to every cohort. And I'm really, really passionate about lobbying those in a position to make those legislative changes, to put the policies in place that will actually be effective and not leave out marginalized communities, which is 90% of the ones that I'm dealing with who are struggling. So, but it's not easy, like, and I'm not going to pretend it is. The last couple of weeks in particular, I've been really, really ill. And every day, like in the mornings, I was getting sick and I was late leaving the house because I couldn't get off the toilet, and just a lot of things that really made me want to crawl under a rock and not move and be like, why do I even think I'm capable of this? But I think what I'm telling myself is, realistically, I probably never work full time when I am qualified. And so this period during college, when I'm gone from placement to placement, like 2 semesters back to back out in the field, it is really burning me out in physically, emotionally, and mentally. So I keep telling myself, once I get through this semester, I'm back on campus and things will slow down a little bit then, which is a pure lie to myself, because I'd be going straight back into a thesis and a dissertation, which is going to bring its own world of stress with it. But for the time being, I just keep trying to take it day by day, week by week, and semester by semester. And I do have a really great support system, excuse me, in that my academic supervisor is amazing. And again, I never held back with her either. I tell them all the truth. And that way then I can't resent them for not meeting me needs that I'm not actually expressing. Because I think that that can happen quite a lot with people. They expect others to know what they need without actually directly communicating that. And I can never be accused of that. So that's, I find that really helpful.
That is the hard bit, isn't it, though? Because, and I've had this conversation with or Reed recently, like where we put forward this face, we're supposed to be the very tough women, we can take on anything, we can cope with anything. And that's all well and good until you actually need help and you think that everybody else is a mind reader and they know that you're having a bad day and it's in pain and you could do with that extra support. So one of the things I know from speaking to people is they find it very difficult to maybe bring up the subject of endometriosis, chronic pain, adenomyosis with their employers or with school or with college or even with their friends and family. So have you any tips, on how to bring up that conversation, and how to sort of say, well, look, actually, there is days that I do need that wee bit of extra support. And how do you flag that? So, if I know by looking at you, you might be having a bad day, but how do you flag that for your closest people and say, look, if I'm like this, I need that additional support?
I suppose I kind of am the exception there. A lot of people have no my face. I'm very much to wear my heart on my sleeve type of person, and it can be quite like I've often had co-workers and stuff say to me, "We're really struggling today, aren't you?" They know by my eyes. I wear the pain in my eyes more so. But like with me close family, like that was really hard in the beginning. And I remember my brother, when I was living there for a very short period, he said to me, "I don't understand. Like, how could you be that bad and you're going out for a smoke? You're coming down the stairs to go out to your car to smoke. That doesn't make any sense to me." And I remember being really frustrated and saying, do you know when you have a really, really bad flu and you can't do anything?" And he goes, "Yeah, the last thing I want to do is go out and smoke." I said, "Listen to me. When you have a really, really bad flu and you cannot move and it's really impactful and you need help, support, blah, blah, blah." He went, "Yeah." I said, "Imagine feeling like that every single day, every single day. Then you might crawl out for a cigarette if it made you feel better." Like mentally. And it wasn't even, it was cannabis that I was going out to consume, which is my form of pain relief. So that conversation kind of started turning the wheels in his head a little bit. And then it was a poem actually I wrote that a few of my siblings read, and it brought them to tears. They had no idea the impacts of what I was actually dealing with. And it prompted them, I suppose, then to start listening. There was a lot of BBC coverage in the UK about endometriosis around this time that's standing out in particular. And I remember my brother texting me one day and saying, "I absolutely cannot believe that I had that attitude with you. I'm so sorry." And like just that validation meant so much. Do you know what I mean? Because I am a firm believer in you can't know what you don't know until you know. And it's only when you know that's when the onus does fall on you to behave differently or to react differently or to support differently or whatever that might look like for your family member. So yeah, again, just trying to be really honest. And like I often find I get myself into arguments with people about things that don't even directly impact me, but things that I've learned by dealing with a lot of other women. Do you know? So like I'm not married, but I might give some husband a bollocking about his wife or a wife a bollocking about the husband because I've heard all these stories about how it impacts their relationship. And I think just not being afraid to really speak about any aspect of it. And I even my mum now sometimes if I bring up periods or something, she'll go, "Shh, your dad." And I'd say, "No." I literally want to slap the shame off her face. I swear to
Mhm.
God. I'm like, we need to have these conversations. And if you'd had these conversations all them years ago, maybe we wouldn't be as stagnant as we are. Do you know? So just not having the shame associated with being really honest about what we go through.
And that's it, isn't it? And it's sort of leaving that behind us as well and making sure that, you know, we're not tying this up with menstruation. We're not just tying this up with periods. Yeah, it has a huge effect on it, but it's a huge effect on everything else. Huge effect on our mental health, huge effect on our emotional well-being, huge effect on our breathing, like, on our joints, our bowel, our bladder. there's so much more to this, isn't there? And like none of them are comfortable to talk about. But I think on the days when you're not able to advocate for yourself, I think it's important, isn't it, that you don't lose the faith. There's always somebody out there talking about endometriosis, and that's fine. We'll keep that going for the people who can't speak. But it is important for somebody who's maybe going through that very early stages as well, is to have that conversation with friends and family and maybe give them an information leaflet or point them towards a website. Dr. Andrew Cook has a very good piece written about what it really means to have endometriosis, and I'll link it in the show notes. And I always find that's quite helpful for some family members as well. And they do tend to sort of go, oh, I didn't realize it was like that, or it was that bad. You touched on one thing there that you're very well known for, and that is the use of medicinal cannabis for your pain. And you're the first patient in Ireland to receive a ministerial license, which I know was very hard fought for. And it took a lot of perseverance on your behalf. Could you take me through that process a wee bit, and how has that sort of been working for you in the last number of months? Has it worked out well?
Yeah, so I will say I was the first endometriosis patient to get it for chronic pain. There were other patients that had it for other conditions and for chronic pain as well, but I was the first with endo, which was huge milestone. The validation alone, like it took me, I'd say the guts of about 8 years maybe, of trying to get medical professionals to recognize the therapeutic benefits that I had from consuming cannabis. So it was such a long battle. Again, feeling like it was so stigmatized. There was a lot of shame attached to it. And again, I just tried to stand in my integrity and just be brutally honest about the fact that this was actually benefiting my life and this was helping me be able to cope with the pain, with the mental anguish. But the problem was, it was hanging over me all the time that the guards could kick my mum and dad's door in at any time, raid the house. I could end up in front of a judge. I could lose my driving license. There was all of these implications that were adding to the stress that was counteracting the good that it was doing in the first place, you know? So I was dismissed by many doctors, consultants, and GPs. And I finally got a new GP who was very open minded, that I'm still so grateful to this day to have. It completely took it, like, what's the word I'm trying to say? My medical trauma took a turn when I was assigned to this GP. And slowly but surely over the last 3 years, he's helped to kind of erode that feeling about going to the doctors, because he's been so supportive. And it was him he decided to refer me to 2 different pain clinics to see which appointment would come up quicker, because I had waited 5 years for a pain appointment in a specific hospital to be completely dismissed then after the 5 years. So I was really upset, and I knew there was a guy in Cork who had prescribed cannabis in the past to other patients that I'd have a good chance with him. So I asked for a referral for there, and he said, look, I'll just send a referral to Limerick as well. You never know what may come up quicker. And the appointment for Limerick did come up quicker. I still haven't got the one for Cork. But the pain consultant that I met really listened to me. He was very open-minded, and I was just happy that he heard me out, kind of a thing. He'd never heard of cannabis before, like for in a medicinal capacity. He said, "Oh no, I'm not signed up to that." And I said, "No, excuse me, you don't sign up. You apply on behalf of individual patients. It's not something that you get as a whole. Like it's very individual specific, patient specific." And so he said, "Look, I'll have a look into it. Can we try my way first, and then if we don't have any luck with the procedures, then maybe we can look at going your way." And I said, "Yeah, totally. That's fine." I was happy enough with that. He heard me out. He was taking on board what I said. And so I had 2 procedures, I think, 2 forms of injection. Some was Botox into the muscles in my back, and another one, I think it was called pedendal something. It was injections at the very top of the pelvis, and that was awful. It was really, really painful. So it wasn't helping with the pain. Like the pain was still quite severe or whatever. So the next time I went to see him, he said, "Okay, we'll apply for the cannabis license." And I just couldn't believe it. It was the one day I was on my own as well. Mum wasn't with me. And I just ran out to the car crying. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. But I was so ready for another battle. I expected him to apply to the Minister for Health, the Minister for Health to say no, and then for me to have to appeal it then. So even though it was great news, it was like, it's only the first hurdle. Like, we still have so far to go. And then it wasn't disapproved. On the first go, the Minister for Health signed off on it, but there was no official letter or email or any official correspondence to say, yes, congratulations, you've got a ministerial license to be prescribed cannabis. So I still kind of didn't know what was going on for a couple of weeks. And then I was in Lanzarote and I looked at my junk folder on my email, and I had an email from control drugs at hse.gov.ie. And I was going, what? Clicked into it and it said, dear patient, the next delivery from Transvaal Pharmacy in the Netherlands will be taking place on such a date. And I was going, does that mean I have it? Does that mean, like, I didn't really know, but it did mean that I was now on the patient list for the government to collect the cannabis goods in the Netherlands and deliver to Ireland. So I think that area is a very figure it out by yourself kind of an area, and I think it's probably, now that I'm talking about it, it's probably worth me while maybe putting together a little step-by-step process, because it is quite complex each month, getting the prescription, getting it paid, like the timelines required to do it and all this kind of stuff. So again, it was something I had to figure out by myself. There was nobody to actually say, look, this is how you do it. And that was a bit difficult, but sure, I'm a dab hand now. It's a year. Next month will be mark the year anniversary. My first prescription was written actually in November, but I didn't get the delivery till December. So I suppose December will be the year. And how's it going? Brilliant. Like, the one thing is the fear of being criminalized has been eradicated. So that took massive, massive pressure and weight off my shoulders. The guards can't kick me mum and dad's door in now. They can't take my driving license
and
now.
That's the thing, isn't it? And that's a huge thing, because you're piling that stress and worry on top of everything else. And that's the thing that we need to look at for sort of chronic pain patients as well, isn't it? To give them that protection and to make sure that there's an accessible pathway for them for something that they may find beneficial. It'd be fantastic if you had a wee go-to guide for that. It'd be absolutely brilliant. But again, it's like a lot of things in healthcare, and a lot of things in disability services, a lot of things in the health service, that unless you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's done this, it's very, very hard to get that information. And, your consultant sort of saying, okay, we'll try it this way before we go down this pathway. And you can understand that if that's something they're not exposed to and they're not familiar with, that's fair enough. And it takes a lot of trust for you to enter into that as a patient, as well, to, put yourself forward for more procedures or more medications or whatever before, sort of coming to that compromise and agreeing that that's what's needed. And in terms of the legislation around that, and in terms of people being able to access this, can you see this getting any easier in the near future? I know you're involved in a lot of activism, and do you think this is going to become easier for us?
I would like to hope so, but at the moment I feel very deflated about it all. But just to touch, before I get into the legislation, just to touch on the doctor, the consultant who prescribed it, excuse me. So thankfully I did feel safe and, educated enough to bring it to him in the first place. But he was secure enough in himself and his ego to actually listen to me and not shut me down. And I think that is such a huge piece, because we don't get that with the majority of the healthcare professionals. And so I think it's really important to commend him for that, because when I was back at an appointment a couple of months ago, he told me that 2 more of his patients are now on ministerial cannabis licenses. So they wouldn't have even known that that was an option had I not have brought it up with him. And the nurse said that to me as well. She said, I never expected him to take on board what you said, but because you were so articulate and because you knew the ins and outs of what you were talking about, he couldn't deny what you were saying. Like, it had to be taken on board. And that made me happy for my ability, but also sad for those who may not be able to articulate themselves to the same extent that I can. Do you know, so that's again why I think it's really important to have this kind of step-by-step guide, or like tips and tricks on how to talk to your doctor about cannabis. And I know Patients for Safe Access have got some kind of document on their website about how to talk to your doctor about cannabis, which has been helpful. I think the Patients for Safe Access phone number had a call from a doctor in a hospital in Dublin. The doctor actually thought they give the cannabis. Like, again, I had no idea about the MCAP program, about the ministerial license route. So this, I suppose, segues me into why I'm not as hopeful as I'd like to be. It's because the majority of the medical profession still don't know, or don't accept, or won't investigate the therapeutic benefits to cannabis. So I feel like those who are pro prohibition and the status quo, they're so busy spouting the same kind of outdated propaganda arguments, and there's very little will to kind of break the conditioning, really, because that's what it is. They've been conditioned for the last 60 years that drugs are bad, drugs are bad. And the way my good friend Martin Condon, he's a massive cannabis activist, and policy reform in general, like he'd be quite active. He says if we were to talk about driving and only focus on the dangers of driving, no, or criminalize those who drove wrong or whatever, we'd never get into a car. Do you know? And it's the same concept. We've only been consumed with propaganda about the dangers of drug use and cannabis use, and it's often quite exaggerated. It's often the statistics that are used are very, very outdated and have been debunked, but it's the same old story. And that's where I feel it's stagnant in the way that we're trying to move forward. But the Citizens Assembly came to a close last week. So we had a Citizens Assembly on drug use, and there was an overwhelming appetite for reform. So people don't want the status quo anymore. They don't want patients like me being put in front of a judge for consuming cannabis. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it also takes away from those who truly are in addiction and have problematic drug use, who really need support. The beds are not there for these people because they're clogged up by patients like me pleading guilty, pretending I have an issue just to avoid a court conviction and something that will stay in my record for the rest of my life. Do you know what I mean? So this is one of the areas. Like, there's an endometriosis patient in touch with me, and of all the stories and of all the people that I've helped over the last 5 years, this girl's story, I literally lost sleep over. I cried so many tears. I felt so helpless. I didn't know how to help her. She decided to grow her own hemp plant, and a hemp plant doesn't even contain any THC, which is the illegal component. And yet the armed response unit kicked her door in with guns for one plant. One plant. And it was in a small rural village. So the impact that had on the wider community and how they viewed her, like, you think she was in one of the drug cartels or one of the drug gangs, the way she was treated afterwards. And it just absolutely broke my heart, because her story was so similar to mine in terms of where the endometriosis was. Like, she had extensive thoracic endometriosis and was saving for surgery abroad to have it removed. And all of this happened in the meantime. So she had court fines, she had solicitors' fees, like, taken away from her savings from this life-saving surgery that she needed. Like, so I think that story in particular absolutely broke my heart. And because, again, she wasn't an Irish national, she was from another country, so English was her second language. She couldn't even communicate herself what was going on. She didn't have a full comprehension from the guard's point of view, solicitor's point of view. She just couldn't understand why nobody could understand that she was in pain and she didn't break the law. Do you know? But nobody was willing to speak up for her. No TDs were willing, no solicitors were willing to take on a judge. Like, it's just this perpetual awfulness. I don't know the word to use, but I think we need a massive overhaul in educating professionals in every sector. Because even in terms of the medical negligence, like the statute of limitations for a patient to prove medical negligence is 2 years. If we're waiting an average of 7 to 10 years for diagnosis, how are we supposed to have a chance to try and prove medical negligence for all those years? Like, it just, I feel like every policy and at every turn, it's just against us. It's oppressing us as a community. And that again, I suppose, drives me passion to try and get to the policymakers and let them see the direct impact it's having on the people on the ground.
And that's where it needs to go, isn't it? It is the policymakers. We have to get that through to them on an education level, on a campaigning level, on an activism level, on an advocacy level. And as you said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of money in producing cannabis-based medication. You know, nobody's going to get rich out of making this. So no drug companies have funded big trials. There's been no randomized controlled trials of, you know, huge proportions that you would see within, you know, the advent of a new drug. And you always are wary of that. You think, well, you know, if you can't make money out of this, you're just going to leave it, rather than looking at, you know, the potential benefits for a community, no matter what that intervention is. You know, it should deserve the same amount of attention and the same amount of scientific approach as a brand new drug does. But unfortunately, a brand new drug makes a lot of money for companies, and that's what pays for a lot of the things.
And that is what
And
it boils down to. And the sad thing is, so although it's really helpful for me to have the license, it's not 100% effective because the product available to me is one strain and that's it. I can't switch it up. Like if I was up in Northern Ireland, for example, there are so many private clinics that you can attend, that you can do consultations, and you can choose which strain you want. You can change it from month to month. You can say, oh well, that was really good for the cramps, but actually the other one is better for the headaches. Or you know, there's more rain to really trial and error what strains work for you. Whereas here we're just stuck with the one. And I have another friend with severe chronic pain who actually is a cannabis refugee in Spain, because when she got the license here, the only product that was available to her actually exacerbated her pain. The strain didn't agree with her endocannabinoid system at all. And so she ended up having to move to Spain to access via the social clubs there, which are much more affordable and much more, I suppose, quality assured than buying it on the unregulated market here in Ireland. It's very, very expensive and you don't know what you're going to get. You can't question it. Blind Boy, I don't know if you're familiar with his podcast, but when he talks about cannabis, he says there's only one strain in Ireland and it's called Do You Want It or Not? Because we've no choice. Like, do you want that or not? They don't care. Do you know what I mean? So I think in terms of safe access, if we were to adopt the social club model, that would make it so much safer for patients to be able to go into a social club and say, okay, this, and this are my ailments. Maybe I've tried cannabis in the past and it made me anxious or maybe paranoid. Like if you have somebody knowledgeable enough to actually share that with, they can offer advice and say, oh well, maybe this strain might be better, that won't make you paranoid, but this one might make you a little bit more relaxed, or this one might give you energy. Like sometimes when I have an edible, I can scrub my room from top to bottom, whereas someone else might have an edible and be stuck to the couch for the day. Do you know, you just don't know until you can try it for yourself. And there's very little opportunity for us to be able to do that in the black market. Again, emphasizing the need for the social club model, and the fact that if you're buying it from a dealer who may also sell cocaine or heroin or crack, you don't want to be caught up in the same stigma as those customers by going to that person, or even a mistaken identity and be shot by mistake because you're literally going to get your medicine off Jono down the street. Do you know, it like there's so many safety issues with the current model. And I'm like you've heard me say before, I'm one patient in the entire country that has it. Like, what about the other 250,000 odd women that could probably benefit from it? Now,
and that's
actually,
it.
the two licenses that the professor, the consultant told me for other patients, one of those is an endometriosis patient, which is great. So I'm no longer the only one, which is amazing, you know, but we need the opportunity to be there for anybody who chooses to try that avenue. Because another thing is you have to have exhausted all other treatments before you can avail of the cannabis treatment. So that's another like unnecessary load of hoops that you have to jump through. So there's a huge changes needed. And I know Gino Kenny is still campaigning hard for the expansion of the MCAP program, not just more conditions, but more products to be available. So we can only hope.
It makes sense because knowing, even just if we take our own community of endometriosis and adenomyosis patients, there is such variability. Every single person, we might have very similar locations for endometriosis. It affects us completely differently. And no two patients are going to be the same. So it doesn't make sense to sort of give, one thing to one person and think that it's going to work for everybody. You need that variability. The safety is absolutely paramount. And like anything, when you're delivering a dose of something, you need to know what that dose is. You need to know side effects for that. You need to know the consistency with the quality control of that. That can only be done by bringing in proper, controls, proper standards, and proper, sort of, I suppose, regulation legislation around that. But they need to listen to the community. And I think that's, sort of comes true from many of the advocacy work that I've seen you do, is that the community are very, very willing to give that information and very willing to try and support any conversation around this. And I think that brings us back around to the endometriosis community as well, too. We're here to help. We're here to give our expertise because nobody knows our conditions better than we know ourselves, So I think it's one of those things where, you feel like you're shouting into the void sometimes. But I know the amount of people who have read your story in the last year and have thought, I never even thought I could look at medicinal cannabis for pain. I didn't really think you could do that. Well, would it help with my nausea? Would it help with this? And you've started that train of thinking. Now, I've been quite lucky. I've spoken to people internationally. I've met people internationally. And like you said, there are different strains, different things, finding their feet, because they have good access and they have very safe and legal access as well, too. And I think to see something like that in Ireland would be very, very good for the chronic pain community, and very, very good, I think, for, the patient community in general, because again, it gives you another option. There's nobody stopping me picking up a bottle of whiskey on the way home on a Friday to wash down my opioids. I have done it. Nobody has ever stopped me. And nobody has ever once questioned, oh, you really shouldn't do that. You do get an odd look and sort of go, is that wise? But nobody's ever come out and said, have you exhausted all other options?
I didn't even get that. No, I like, and family members, excuse me, who would have been quite conditioned into the prohibitionist way of thinking drugs are bad, cannabis is a drug, blah, blah, blah. They would happily go and get me a 20 box of Budweiser at 11 o'clock in the morning if I was upside down on the ground in pain. Like, they'd happily let me self-medicate with alcohol. But as soon as I went out for a joint, it was, oh, that's bad, that's wrong. Do you know, so in terms of like their education, they've come on leaps and bounds. Like, my mom is 77 years of age next week, and she's educating people of her age of what this strain does and what that strain does. And she thinks it's so funny, the names of them. So one of the vapes that I had was called Unicorn Piss. And my mom would say to my brother, do you like the smell of her piss? Talking about the vape. So like we can joke about it now, but like what you were saying there about the like really looking into it and researching it and what the effects might be. And I feel like they want to do that with cannabis and they'll use it as an excuse with cannabis. But then on the other hand, with prescribed medication, I don't feel like there's informed consent there because they don't really go into the possible side effects, which we all know exist because we've all been subject to having to take horrendous painkillers with really, really kind of detrimental side effects that for me were often worse than the symptoms I was trying to treat in the first place. And so it was redundant and it made me develop a psychological block when it comes to taking medication. So now I only take my pill. I've only taken my pill since my last surgery. I do have Oxynorm, Vimovo, Scodexa in the bedroom just in case, God forbid, those like the fear of that bad pain returning is always there. And so having an extra backup in pharmaceutical form, I suppose, helps to put me mind at ease. But when I get to a point where I have to take it, it's a full-blown panic attack and I don't want to be taking this. What's this going to do to me? I know how this is going to make me feel for the next 2 days, especially with the Oxy. If I take that, and it's like weighing up what's worse, the side effects of the next 3 days for taking this or the pain I'm in right now. And again, it's ongoing risk assessment. You're constantly reassessing your own needs. And I think you have to be solid in trusting yourself and your instincts and your gut in order to be able to navigate that, because it's not something that goes away after surgery. As you and I both well know, surgery is only the first step. You've been years dealing with this condition. Your body is not going to just recover overnight with a specialist excision surgery. And so I remember going to Romania and speaking to you about, you were the only person that I said it to. I was afraid of letting the pain go, because then what? Then who am I? Like, my identity had become so wrapped up in this chronic pain thing that what if all my pain was gone? Then what do I do with my life? And like most people would think, well, that's fucking amazing. Like, what is your problem? But just because that had become so normalized and such an integral, central part of my life, it was really kind of, what am I going to do here? And thankfully, I'm grand because my pain never went away. Like, we did become more manageable, obviously, but it's mad, isn't it? Like the psychological layers that we got.
Oh, it's crazy. And I was the same on the flight. I like when I was heading for my surgery, I was like, I'm not really sure I'm ready to have this surgery. It's only surgery number 8, I'm not I'm not really sure I want to give this up, And even then, when I came back, I had boxes of sanitary towels and tampons all around the house, every handbag, even at work. I haven't had a period since the year 2000, you know? Where did I think it was going to come out of? My uterus is now gone. But it was just letting go of the weird things, isn't it? It's just like, I'm not really sure I'm ready to let that go yet. Still haven't lost the black underwear. That is still firmly in the psyche. Can't go anywhere else now, So you're right. It does cause that deep ingrained trauma. I think is probably the best word for it. I know we laugh about it, but it sort of is. And it's how you manage that,
Like, that humor is a defense mechanism anyway. And at the end of the day, if we can't laugh at those kind of traumas, like what can, we're sick of crying. So we have to make light of what we can, but that's not to take away from like how deep it can go. I mean, I remember a time where I would not leave the house without at least 5 or 6 different forms of pain relief, just in case something hits when I'm out and about, or and it's letting go of those, learning that I don't need those things. Well, to be fair, I don't leave the house without at least 5 different forms of cannabis to consume, because like that, when the pain hits. So it is the same thing, it's just a slightly different product now. But yeah, I don't think people really understand the psychological level, or even the mental health side of things. Like, a nurse in my pain clinic phoned me and asked me if it was okay to pass my information on to another patient they had. She was extremely low, felt like nobody believed her. And the nurse was like, even though, like, of course we do believe her, we just don't know how to help her. And we thought maybe talking to you might give her some support. And of course I said, yes, like, do give her my number, because I don't want anybody to feel like they're alone in this. That's the whole idea of being an advocate in the first place. But on the other hand, it was like, if an operational pain management clinic doesn't have an avenue to send this girl for her emotional pain, and instead we're putting it back again on other patients to support patients, like, we're really in trouble when that's the standard.
It is. And apart from the fact we have such a deficit of pain clinics in the country anyway, they're not used to dealing with endometriosis. I know certainly my own local pain clinic is used to dealing with a lot of geriatric patients. And, they were quite sort of wondering what I was doing there, when I went back in the early stages. And it was like, oh, but sure, when you go through menopause, you'll be fine. Yeah, that conversation went very well. But they... It was good. It was good. And thankfully, like, the thinking has shifted a little since. But it is that gap in those sort of combined services, isn't it? And I think, again, too, we're thinking again that endometriosis and adenomyosis are basement level healthcare. So it's women's health, first of all, it's gynecology. That's it. You're born, you sort of menstruate, you have children, you go through the menopause, and off you go. And if you don't fit that plan, well, we'll find some way of shoehorning you into it. And I think we need to get away from that thinking. we need to realize that endometriosis has that systemic effect. And that's where the psychological support, the occupational therapy support, the pelvic physio support, the whole body physio support, diet, nutrition, there's so many things that we can benefit from. And there's nobody who has pulled all that together yet in one centre. I think when I, set up my magic island, I think I'll be able to do it, but I might need the Euro Millions. But we are looking at a community that are having to pull these resources together themselves. And you and I both know that fight as hard as you might and for as long as you can, it's very tiring. It can be very draining and very frustrating. And you might never hear back from people. But the times that you do hear back, and be it that one patient that you get that random message at 3 a.m, and that patient will come back and say, oh, I actually tried this, or I took that, or I went to this patient, or this doctor, and I read this piece of information. And it was life-changing for them because it was the first step of them taking, that bit of responsibility for their own education. But not just that, it's often the first time that they were heard. And I think this is, again, where sort of advocacy and community and support is so, so important. And have you learned anything in your, like the courses that you've done and also your journey through this over the last few years? Have you picked up any tools or mechanisms that you could share that would be good for people?
I suppose the the most important thing is meeting people where they're at. And so one of the biggest tools that I use now to get me through is gratitude journal. And I'm all about the gratitude mindset. But when that was first introduced to me, I needn't tell you what my reaction was like. I didn't want to be grateful. You expect me to be grateful for being in pain 24/7 for right? And I was listing all the things. And it, when I started kind of coming around to it, I was like, it was all about perspective all along. It wasn't invalidating the suffering that I was feeling because I was grateful for brushing my teeth that day, for brushing my hair that day, for being able to have a shower. Like this, even the smallest of things. And it did start out really small because I found it very difficult in the mindset I was in to find things that I was grateful for at the time. But now, because I've practiced it so much daily, like multiple times a day, like a person would let me pass in traffic and I go, I'm really, really grateful for that. Like really small things, but ingraining it into myself, conditioning myself to practice gratitude has really helped me in terms of making sense then of the bigger things. When things go really wrong, I can find the small gratitudes in the big mess. So that's been a hugely helpful tool for me. Just being honest, like actually getting it off my chest and not trying to pretend that I have no limitations. I think faking it can often be more exhausting and more tiring, putting on the fake face and the fake smile. And I'm on placement now in college, and it's a very, very much chaotic environment. Like we're dealing with people experiencing homelessness, who are in addiction, families affected by imprisonment, kids impacted by domestic violence. Like there's a whole range of social issues that I wouldn't probably have any direct experience with. But now that I see the impact it has on them, it reinforces the gratitude. Yes, I might be puking out the car on the motorway on the way home, but I have a car and I have a home and I have a full belly. And there's so many out there that don't. And again, it's not about invalidating my own suffering for the sake of others. It's about just having perspective and knowing that things could be a lot worse. And me telling myself how grateful I am is going to benefit me more than me complaining about the pain that I'm in, because I'm going to be in pain one way or the other. Do you know that way? So again, it comes back to the psychological. Like they've been the best tips and tricks for me in terms of how to navigate those really down days, and I still get them. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not saying I'm on top of the world all the time. You only have to see me Instagram to know that I'm always crying on Instagram. But again, it's that raw, authentic, real piece that people really connect with that you mentioned earlier. And people do respond to that. Like, they might say, oh my God, I was feeling that way and I didn't know how to articulate it. Or I wanted to tell my boyfriend this and I didn't know how, so I showed him your post and that broke the ice. Or, so it's not just me kind of having my own little therapy, getting it off my chest, but it's also others finding common ground in that and being able to use that then to help them navigate their journey. So again, just meeting people where they're at is the number one, because I wasn't ready for gratitude when it was introduced to me, but yet down the line, this is what I live by now. It's a way of life for me now.
It's brilliant, and it's a fantastic tip as well too, that even on the shittiest of days that we can actually find something, and be that we can just get up and put our socks on, and certainly it's looking for the positive in things as well. And it can sound very twee and it can sound very like, oh, here we go, but you can retrain your brain. And that's one of the things in the chronic disease self-management course, is the power of positive reinforcement to yourself, because we can very easily look in the mirror and go, oh, I hate my hair, oh, I hate my eyes, oh, I hate my teeth, whatever. You will wear yourself down. It's the same when you're in chronic pain. It's like, oh, I can't do this. But being able to say, well, I actually did put on my socks, or I did sit on the edge of the bed, or I did manage to brush my teeth. Because for a lot of people in chronic pain, sometimes we actually can't do that. And they're the bits that people don't see. We can turn up to work and we can turn up to our college and placements and all that, and we'll pull ourselves together, but they don't see the 2 hours before that. And
what it took to get there.
That's it. And I think, and I think you're right with the different levels of gratitude. It's so important to look at the level that you're at, and then, as you say, meet people on the level that they're at as well too. I think that's really important. And do you find, your Instagram, I think, has been a huge support for people, especially people who've traveled for surgery? And like, we get a lot of, sort of pushback as an advocacy community. And I've talked about this on nearly every sort of episode of the podcast. Do you find that in general, the use of social media as an advocacy tool, as an information sharing tool, is important? Or do you think that there are, almost too many negatives for it to continue in the way that it is?
Oh, absolutely not. I think it has to continue, because I think if it weren't for my Instagram, I don't know if I'd even still be here, truthfully, because those, like, I've only been running it since 2019, so it's been 4 years. And in those 4 years, the friendships, the connections that I've built, the support system that I've created in that space has been totally invaluable for me and for countless others as well. So I think there's pros and cons and everything, and there are worrying aspects of the social media side in terms of people having the best of intentions but maybe perpetuating misinformation. I absolutely think that is a red flag and it's an issue, and I think that the community are getting so good, so much better at calling it out. And we've seen that in recent months when people have posted, and the backlash that they got from advocates, it, like, rightly so, in my opinion. Like, it's warranted backlash, because they may not understand the implications of the misinformation, but we do. We're the ones that are supporting these people 24/7. Like, these professionals clock out at 5 o'clock and they're back in at 9 the next day. We're on the Instagram at 3 o'clock in the morning, consoling the person who doesn't know whether to go to the hospital or not, doesn't know if their ovaries are rupturing or not. Like, so I think in terms of that peer support, that it's absolutely vital for mental and psychological well-being that we have that space to interact with each other. But obviously, I do recognize the implications, but I don't think the implications outweigh the positives.
I know, and I agree on that. And I do think that seeing the evolution, I suppose, of social media over the while as well too, because we've so much more accounts now, and so many more people posting, and that's really, really good. Again, too, I always temper this, like, it's not awareness if you're not bringing facts to the table. And even if you're sharing your personal journey, if you're not bringing facts into that, or if you're bringing alternative facts, it's not really helpful. And I found that certainly the community in recent times, when they are calling out misinformation, And I can think of a very, large example recently where, there was a lot of comments and they were incredibly polite and they were corrective. They were in no way mean or nasty. And I think that shows the strength of the community, but also I suppose, their understanding in how accurate information is very important because it has long-term implications for us. But also too, the pride in being able to post publicly is so important because, 10, 15, 25 years ago, most of the people that I knew would not post under their own name. Social media didn't exist for a lot of the time. And even when it did at the beginning, I had plenty of people who would not like the charity page because they didn't want their friends, family, and employers to see that they liked that page on social media. And that's okay. That's completely understandable for people. Like, you have to sort of work with everybody.
Meet
But
them
to
where they're
see
at.
so many people, so many people being able to now stand up and say, actually, that line's wrong, and this is why it's wrong, and this is the implication it has for us. I think that's so important, and it shows that the work that's been done over the last number of years really is reaching. I think
Yeah.
that's good.
Like, even in terms of my college and stuff, I like throughout some of the modules on the course, I've incorporated endometriosis. I've brought in cannabis use, and I've done presentations say that I needed, like, that was graded on, in bringing that kind of information in. And like, half of the lecturers in the college was blown away. They had no idea of these things, and it prompted them to do more research, which in turn will help them support more students who do present with endo. And I know, was it Sarah Jane? She done a presentation for her workplace. So the entire company was educated on endometriosis then because of her courage to share her story. And I think people can relate so much more to a personal experience and a personal story than they can from like a research paper. As important as research is, and we absolutely need more of it, and we need more funding and more of an appetite for it, I don't think that losing the patient voice in that is a good idea, because again, I think it's more impactful and it lands differently when someone is speaking from their heart and from their own lived experience. And again, it can be like just really, really powerful, and it changes lives. I mean,
It does.
reading the stories I read changed my life, and I get messages all the time that reading my story has changed their life, and it's a ripple effect. And we can't underestimate the power of just standing in our own power and having the courage to really let go of the shame and be brutally honest about how much it's impacting our lives and how much it's impacting the lives of our families, our employers, our peers, our kids. Do you know, it's literally an everybody disease. It's not just the patient, it's their immediate circle, then their wider circle in terms of the things they're able to do or not do. Do you know, so it has a knock-on effect for everybody. And that awareness piece is so important to bring back to factual information and lived experience.
And that's one of the things I'd hoped to bring through in the podcast was that the lived experience, no matter what it comes from, but living with a chronic illness, I think is so important because it informs your view on things, I think, a lot differently. And how I feel about, public and patient participation in research. I think it's an absolute essential. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise. But certainly the community in peer support it's very, very important. And I think one thing we need to do as well as advocates is make sure that we support each other, and also to help develop each other. So if you have a set of tools or you have a set of tips and tricks that you've discovered that are really good for you, you're very open and you're sharing things like that. And that's one thing that I think is quite nice within this community, that very few people are going to gatekeep things like that. And I think that's probably what sets us apart from a lot of other communities, which I like. And I hope that continues as well. I hope it continues in a positive sort of way like that.
I think as well that goes to show how desperate we are, in that we don't want anybody else to feel that desperation. And if we find one thing that works, we're going to shout it from the rooftops. And if it helps one person, like I've heard you say it, and I say it myself as well. If there's 10 people eye rolling when they see a post, one person is going, oh my God, I'm going to try this. Oh my God, this might be helpful for me. Do you know, so I think it's so, so important just to support each other, because it can be such an isolating disease, as we both well know. And I think that it's such a paradox. Like, it's such an isolating disease. And then when you break into the community and you see how many actually suffer and that you are truly not alone. Like, I just think it's one extreme to the other, and it's mind blowing.
It is. And again, you know, we have to be thankful, I suppose, to all who came before us. And we're recording this in the week that one of our greatest advocates has passed away, Dr. David Redwine. So again, we'll just offer some appreciation and absolute gratitude for the work that he has done, the inspiration that he has given us all. Anybody who's had excision would not have had that done only for his work.
He was,
And
I saw Dr.
powerful.
Meatroy posted that he will forever be grateful to Dr. Redwine, and that he wouldn't have ended up on the path he's on and saving all of us one by one had it not been for Dr. Redwine. So my eternal gratitude to him, and condolences to his family and friends as well. Like, we've lost a huge piece of the community, but his legacy will never ever be forgotten.
That is so true. That is so true. And we hope that in future textbooks that, you know, Dr. Redwine's theory of Medicinal and the origins of endometriosis will replace those outdated theories of retrograde menstruation. I think that'll be a lovely tribute eventually. And all we can do is hope that that will be the case. I think we can keep campaigning. Aimee, it has been fantastic talking to you. We could probably chat for at least another 3 or 4 hours. These are going to turn into epic sagas. I think my podcast episodes are very long. But thank you so much for joining me. It's really meant a lot to me. You know, and to follow your journey over the last few years since we've met has been such an inspiration to me. And I look to you for strength, and I look to you for support, and it's always been there. So I truly appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, that just coming from you, honestly, it means the world. Like, I wouldn't have had the courage or the empowerment to get where I am had I not crossed paths with you. And I say it all the time, you're like the Vicky feeling of endometriosis, and I'm eternally grateful for everything you do for all of us. We all are. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of JARG, and we hope that you've enjoyed it, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Thank you.